Good morning, everyone. Welcome to the 2025 Stone Living Lab Conference. My name is Joe Christo. I serve as the co-director of the Stone Living Lab, along with Katie Dafforn, who will be giving a fantastic keynote presentation this morning. I hope everyone is hydrated, caffeinated, and ready to share and learn together today. This conference is coming at a really important moment in our field and in our country, and I'm just so thankful and fortunate to be here with all of you today. I'd like to start this morning with a land acknowledgement. The Stone Living Lab conducts research and educational programs in Boston Harbor, the islands, and the land along its shores. We recognize that these lands, including where we are gathered today for this conference, are the unceded and still occupied homelands of the Massachusetts tribe. The Massachusetts people have lived here continuously for over 10,000 years, long before Europeans colonized the land. The Stone Living Lab takes seriously its responsibility to respect people, flora and fauna, and natural spaces, and to incorporate indigenous traditional ecological knowledge into the climate resilience work we do. We have begun on this journey in partnership with members of the Massachusetts tribe, but we have a long way to go. Decolonization is an iterative and long-term journey. Although we must do a lot of learning, including at this conference today, we must also remember that the Massachusetts, as well as many other tribes and peoples, have sustainably cohabitated with land, water, air, and other non-human relatives for thousands of years pre-colonization. There has not been a time when people have not impacted the land we live on. Our choice is whether we do so in reciprocity with our ecosystems and peoples, or continue the extractive actions that have significantly contributed to the changed climate we see today. We must continue to talk honestly, openly, and often about how to collaboratively work toward repairing the harm that has been done by engaging those communities most impacted and co-creating solutions that incorporate lessons we have forgotten. Thank you. In a few minutes, I'm going to welcome UMass Boston Chancellor Marcelo Suarez-Orozco to the stage, but before doing that, I would like to share a few important thank yous. First, thank you to my amazing Stone Living Lab colleagues who I was so fortunate to be able to collaborate with in planning this conference: Katie Dafforn, Rebecca Shore, Brittany Knotts, Allison Novelli, along with our conference coordinators from Tiffany Beer Events, Tiffany Beer, and Kat LeConte. Thank you to our fantastic conference content committee, so many of whom are here today. You can find all their names. There's about 15, so I'm not going to read them all, sorry. In the program booklet, that group was just instrumental in pulling together the content that we're all going to be able to enjoy throughout this conference. I want to thank you as well, say thank you as well to all of my wonderful colleagues at the Stone Living Lab and all of our colleagues at the Stone Living Lab's core partners who, through their work, make this conference possible. Those partners include UMass Boston, Boston Harbor Now, the National Park Service, the Massachusetts Executive Office of Energy and Environmental Affairs, the Massachusetts Department of Conservation and Recreation, the City of Boston, and the Massachusetts Tribe. Thank you to all of the organizations that we are so fortunate to collaborate with in our work at the lab, from the Boston Children's Museum to the Museum of Science to Woods Hole Group, and so represented in this room today. Really appreciate all you joining and all of your collaboration. Thank you, of course, to all of our sponsors, whose logos you will see scrolling on the screen and on various boards throughout the event today. None of this would be possible without your work and support. Two more. A thank you to Kathy Stone, Jim Stone, Sonia Plessett, and Bob Gollage from the Stone Foundation for their continued support of the lab. And thank you to Kathy Abbott at Boston Harbor Now for her thoughtful mentorship and guidance. And lastly, I would like to thank all of you, our speakers and attendees who make this conference so special. So we are so excited to be here with you today. And now it is my honor to introduce Chancellor Marcelo Suarez-Orozco. I'm going to read a brief bio and then welcome him up on stage. Chancellor Suarez-Orozco, the 9th Chancellor of the University of Massachusetts, Boston, is a scholar well known for his empirical and conceptual research in the fields of psychological anthropology and cultural psychology, with a focus on the study of mass migration, climate change, education, and globalization. Prior to his return to the Commonwealth, Suarez-Orozco served as the inaugural UCLA Wasserman Dean, leading 2 academic departments, 16 nationally renowned research institutes, and 2 innovative demonstration schools at UCLA's School of Education and Information Studies. A prolific author, Harvard University Press, Stanford University Press, University of California Press, Columbia University Press, and others have published his award-winning books and edited volumes. Please join me in welcoming Chancellor Marcelo Suarez-Orozco.
Thank you. Thank you, Joe, and good morning. You look amazing, Joe. That's the kind of introduction that my father would have liked and my mother would have believed. Thank you. That was beautiful. I'm so delighted to be here with all of you in these very, very difficult, very challenging times in our country and in our world. And I think coming together in the endeavors pertinent to nature-based coastal resilience in urban settings is so significant, is so important. It was a great French-Algerian writer who in another dark time share with us, when there is no hope, we have to invent it. And we at UMass Boston, we at the Stone Living Lab, echo the words of the great Albert Camus, where there is no hope, we will invent it. Welcome to UMass Boston. I'm delighted to see all of you. And let me first thank Joe for offering that beautiful and so necessary land acknowledgement. As we all know, climate change poses existential threats to all living systems, to our shared future. When I became Chancellor of UMass Boston in 2020, I designated climate equity and urban coastal areas as one of our grand scholarly challenges. It appears indeed in our strategic plan for the times. It is, of course, clear, it's obvious, that Boston's premier public research university, overlooking this gorgeous, this fragile harbor, is obligated to advance public understanding of the climate crisis and help build resilience, help generate scalable solutions to support urban coastal resilience in our region through basic and translational research, teaching, partnerships, and service. We have emerged as a vital partner in the city, in the state, in our collective initiatives centered on climate resilience planning. Our partnership with Climate Ready Boston, with Boston's Office of Climate Resilience, now has contributed to the development of one of our nation's most comprehensive city-led climate action plans. Last month, UMass Boston hosted the Resilient Mass Climate Summit in this very room in collaboration with the Pontifical Academies, founded by Galileo. And in these times when science is challenged, remember what Albert Einstein said: Galileo invented science. As a member of the Executive Council of an academy founded by Galileo, you remember what happened to him, I have to be very careful in everything I do. You can smile at that one, that's a joke. I have to be very careful. The climate summit, from climate resilience, from climate crisis to climate resilience. The summit, we gathered under the leadership of my good friends and partners, Maura Healey, Mayor Wu, municipal leaders from every municipality in the Commonwealth. In a gathering like this, over 300 folk in this room, plus over 100 folk online, gathered. Municipalities from around our Commonwealth, as well as scientists, academics, indigenous leaders, youth, UMass Boston students, advocates, leaders from around the world, the governor of Vihiga County, one of the most threatened counties in Kenya, who will host one of our next 10 global summits in every hemisphere on Earth under the leadership of UMass Boston and the Pontifical Academies in the next 12 months for interactive discussions aimed at enhancing climate resilience in our communities and protecting our most vulnerable populations. Perhaps the most important takeaway from our UMass Boston Summit last month was that as federal resilience efforts falter, it is local actors, governors, mayors, state legislatures, municipalities, along with researchers, universities, indigenous communities, civil societies, NGOs, must collaborate to protect vulnerable citizens from the impacts of climate change. It is our responsibility to build resilience now and moving forward. Paraphrasing the great Tip O'Neill, all resilience is local. Local actors must create the blueprints for resilience that is local within a local framework, local action for global resilience. This is important in Boston, where climate change is experienced in many ways. Among them, of course, rising seas, harbor vulnerabilities, urban flooding, and other impacts on our coastal cities. Across multiple environmental domains, UMass Boston generates research examining what it means for citizens to live with the impacts of extreme climate fluctuations and inform real-time policies and solutions that are both nature-based and technology-smart to bolster, to build resilience. This has prompted efforts to integrate climate adaptation into municipal regional planning and help shape an entire new ecology of innovative products, approaches, services to build on the framework we developed, MAST, M-A-S-T, for MAST, mitigation, adaptation, social transformation, MAST for MAST. The Stone Living Labs recent installation of living seawalls panels in 2 coastal communities in Boston is an example of how research and technological eco-innovation can potentially restore marine habitats in Boston Harbor and marked a historic step in pioneer climate resilience solutions for our city. Last fall, at the Chancellor's lecture series on building climate resilience, Dr. Kongjin Yu, who I was introduced by Jim, Kathy, and Sonia, Xixian, thank you. He has been an amazing partner. The Dean of the School of Design and Architecture at Beijing University gave an extraordinary lecture introducing a tested strategy for engineering sustainable, climate-resilient sponge cities. Faculty research at our School for the Environment have generated tools, insights that advance carbon recycling in coastal wetlands, renewable energy technologies, remote sensing of climate impacts on ocean ecosystems, and various other climate adaptation and mitigation domains. At our Urban Harbors Institute, our faculty, our students are partnering with municipalities to research issues of concern such as fisheries and access to water resources, provide technical assistance in assessing local strengths and vulnerabilities, and prioritize action to enhance coastal resilience. That is the work of an engaged, that is the work of an essential public research university in these very, very challenging times. A Sustainable Solutions Lab study examined climate change from an equity and environmental justice perspective through the lived experience of our Asian American, Black, Latino, Latina, and Native American residents here in Boston, noting variations in health impacts, preparedness, and responses. No single actor, government, academia, the private sector, or civil society has all the resources, all the capacity needed to ensure the building of climate resilience. But together, we do. Together, we can enrich the marketplace of ideas and define what climate resilience plans look like here in Boston and beyond. Today's conference extends this dialogue. It will consider several issues essential for developing coastal resilience projects, such as planning, evaluation, financing, and equity components. Let me close by saying our School for the Environment and the Stone Living Lab team are doing an amazing job on all matters pertinent to building a more resilient Boston Harbor, a more resilient Boston. I am so grateful to them for organizing this conference together with our partners, Boston Harbor Now, the National Park Service, the Massachusetts Department of Conservation and Recreation, the Massachusetts Executive Office of Energy and Environmental Affairs, the City of Boston, and the Massachusetts Tribe. This partnership works precisely because it is collaborative, it is authentic, it is organic, it is democratic. At a time when the practice of democratic citizenship, at a time when the basic tenets of science and the scientific process are under siege. We stand to contravene the assaults on science, on democracy, on civil and human rights. I'd like to very specifically acknowledge and thank someone who needs no introduction in the city of Boston, my friend, our amazing partner in this essential journey, Kathy Stone, an inspiration. An inspiration to all of us at UMass, to all of us in Boston, in our Commonwealth, in our nation. I wish you all a very productive, engaging conference, and I look forward to hearing about the outcomes. Before introducing our next speaker, I want to take a moment to recognize one of my mentors, one of our leaders, a dear friend who has dedicated his career to environmental issues, Professor Paul Kirshen, the founding research director of the Stone Living Lab. Paul has partnered with the Stone Foundation over 8 years ago to create the Stone Living Lab. Paul, as we say in the old country, muchas gracias. Thank you. Thank you for your vision. Thank you for your creativity. Thank you for your dedication. And you have to come here because I have something to give you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Paul. I am so pleased now to introduce Dr. Katie Dafforn, our new co-director of the Stone Living Lab and the distinguished professor of coastal resilience at UMass Boston. Katie comes to us from Sydney, Australia, where she co-founded the Living Seawalls Project and pioneered nature-based approaches to enhancing biodiversity and resilience along urban coastlines. Her work bridges cutting-edge science and practical application, and we are absolutely thrilled. Fantastico. Who can say fantastico? To have her with us as the new co-director of the Stone Living Lab. I give you Dr. Katie Dafforn.
Thank you so much for those kind words and that welcome, Chancellor. And we have arrived very recently, my family and I, in Boston to quite some cold weather compared to where we come from in Sydney. But I have to say that the welcome has been incredibly warm, and so we're very, very grateful to be here working with such a wonderful community in Boston on some really important projects. I'll just check if my slides are there. Perfect. And I have to say a big thank you to my co-director, Joe Christo. We were talking about the keynote for this session, and he gave me the inspiration behind the title. A few jokes about our generation and some of our history, but generally wanted me to talk about the journey that we've had with the Living Seawalls Project and a little bit of the behind-the-scenes experiences. So that's what I thought I'd do this morning. And the journey begins with 5 marine ecologists really passionate about doing marine science in Sydney Harbour and primarily working on understanding impacts from human activities in Sydney Harbour. So from Sydney Harbour doing fairly small-scale research to suddenly being thrust onto the international stage through some exposure with the Earthshot Prize. And this is probably one of my career highlights, perhaps, standing behind Sir David. Unfortunately, didn't get to meet him, but maybe one day that'll happen. And another great highlight, meeting up with the Stone Living Lab in Boston through the Earthshot Prize as well. And we've grown the Living Seawalls Project from just 1 or 2 sites in Sydney Harbour to now being represented fairly globally and seeing new sites being installed all the time. But I better go back to the beginning and talk to you a little bit more about the inspiration that was behind the work that we've been doing through the Living Seawalls project. And I mentioned at the start, a lot of what we've done in the past has been looking at human impacts in marine systems. And one of the big risks to human systems, one of the big threats, is coastal development. The kinds of structures that we're putting in every day to support recreational activity, to protect buildings and infrastructure, to get energy from offshore installations. So we're seeing a lot of these grey infrastructure being installed along our coastline and even increasingly offshore and reclaiming space from the sea in terms of things like artificial islands. My postdoc, Anna Bugnot, who also likes mate, I might just say that for the Chancellor, did a really great study a couple of years ago mapping out what the footprint of that grey infrastructure is around the world. And what we found was that when we look at all of the different things that we've constructed, about 3 million meters squared of the ocean is actually impacted by, kilometers squared of seafloor is actually being impacted by these different kinds of structures. And the physical footprint, the habitats that have been displaced, it's greater than seagrasses and mangrove forests combined. So we know there's a lot of urban sprawl happening on land, but people aren't seeing that happening in the ocean so much. And this study really, I think, brought it to light, just the kind of scale that we're seeing in terms of construction. And we know that there's going to be a massive increase up to 2030 with more protection needed for infrastructure and with that growth of offshore energy. And that marine construction tends to be really at odds with nature. So it generally involves artificial materials. Those materials are installed in different ways to what we see natural habitats forming. And there can be different stressors associated with them, things like pollution from runoff, things like other dredging activities occurring nearby them. So they create a lot of impacts, and they don't provide a lot of habitat for the kind of marine life that they're displacing. So in Sydney Harbour, this has actually driven a bit of a movement. You know, we have a lot of seawalls around the harbour. About 50% of the foreshore is modified with seawalls. Many of them are heritage. And just with scientists in Sydney starting to talk about, well, if we are going to build a new seawall, or if we're going to do some renovations to a seawall, how can we actually change that seawall so that it provides a better habitat for marine life in future? And doing that in a fairly incremental way with different experiments over the last kind of 20 years. And starting just by removing blocks from a sandstone seawall and allowing nature to colonize that space after the block removal, to a little bit of progression, adding simple flower pots from our local DIY store, flower pots that would retain water at low tide and provide almost a rock pool type habitat for things to live in, to some of the initial kind of pilot work that we did before the Living Seawalls project to test a single crevice, ledge type of shape and geometry that we had found could be good for supporting biodiversity. And doing that through a World Harbour Project experiment, which engaged several different cities around the world, installing these crevice ledge tiles and looking at what the benefits were associated with those tiles. At the same time, we were doing a really extensive literature review to identify other kinds of shapes that would be useful to create on panels that could be installed on seawalls, shapes that could create some of that really important habitat that's missing and provide protection from both predation and also heat, the really big stressors that marine life experiences in the intertidal and subtidal zone. Those tiles were fairly small. And in Australia, we like big things. If anybody's ever been to Australia, these are some of our land sites to go and check out, apart from the Sydney Opera House. And that sort of inspired my colleagues and I with the Living Seawalls project. So we had been involved in the World Harbour Project, testing these small tiles, and we wanted to scale up. And to do that, it took more than ecology. It took more than that understanding we had of marine systems. So we partnered with an industrial designer. And we talked to Alex Goad, that's his name up on the screen. We talked to Alex about what we wanted to see in terms of bringing habitat back to seawalls. And he was able to help us recreate some of that. And the designs that we have, I mentioned the literature review that we did, they're all based on science. They're all based on an understanding of what different shapes will provide in terms of benefits for marine life. And they're inspired by nature as well. A lot of it taken from the Sydney landforms that we see with the the Sydney sandstone that weathers in particular patterns to form things like rock pools, that forms things like crevices and ledges and swim-throughs for fish, but also looking at some of the creatures, the seaweeds that grow in harbors that have quite extensive root systems that can also provide really great habitat for marine life to live on. And so we started with 5 designs, and these are the kinds of living seawalls panels that we started working with. So scaling from that first initial prototype that was about 15 centimeters in size and maybe a kilo in weight to 55 centimeters in size and 20 kilos in weight. And from just temporary experimental installations to now we're looking at permanent installations around the world and really changing the face of great infrastructure with these panels. And I thought I'd just talk a little bit more about some of the design that went into it and some of the fabrication that's involved. So we don't 3D print the panels, but 3D printing is really the innovation that's allowed us to incorporate all of our great ecological ideas into something that can be fabricated and installed on a seawall. We 3D print the molds, and then we cast the molds with concrete. So that's one of the diagrams of the casting process. And the panels, when we started installing them in Sydney Harbour and talking again just outside of our comfort zone as ecologists to engineers, the big question came up, what about the structural integrity of these panels? How long are they going to last? If you're giving me a permanent installation on my seawall, what can I expect? So we partnered with an engineering firm to test the structural integrity, and they estimated that the life of the seawall panels in the conditions that we were testing them in Sydney Harbour was about 20 years. But we know that they can probably last for a lot longer than that. Once there is a living reef established on these panels, great potential for them to last forever even. And so this is one example of our site in Sydney Harbour. This was the first site that we installed at, and this is our hero shot, so it turns up on a lot of brochures these days and in a lot of talks as well. And this site is now 5 years old. So it was our baby, and now it's kind of fully grown in terms of what's living on that. And fully colonized. You can almost not see the living seawall panels there anymore. One of the things that we've done in conjunction with installing and having these permanent installations is design a really rigorous monitoring program to go along with them. And that's both going out and sampling with quadrats and counting everything that's on the panels and trying to understand everything that's growing there, having cameras in the water to see what are the fish doing, are they hiding and using the panels as habitat for protection, or are they feeding from what's growing on the panels? And we're extending that monitoring program all the time to try and assess other benefits. So we focus primarily on biodiversity in Sydney, but there's a big concern around water quality. And we know that oysters recruit to our panels, and we know that seaweeds recruit to our panels. And so we know that there's good potential for everything growing on those panels to actually improve the water quality in Sydney Harbour as well. So that's another thing that we're developing a technique to actually measure and quantify so that we can give that information to people. That evidence-based approach has allowed us to really expand the number of designs of panels that we have as well. So going from those original 5 panels, we now have 11 different designs, some inspired by rock forms, some inspired by nature, seaweeds, and our most recent design panel was specifically for the United Arab Emirates and involves a coral-inspired geometry. We've also been kind of talking about how modular the living seawall panels are. That modularity means that, anywhere in the world that we want to install these panels, we can think about what the local habitats are like, what the local species are like, and then we can select from our 11 designs, or maybe design a new one, to make sure that we can combine them in a mosaic that is best suited to that new location. So it can be quite bespoke. There's been times when we've designed new panels for different partner needs, but there's also this big range that people can kind of grab and adapt to their specific needs and specific desires. We also incorporate upcycled material into the panels. So the type of concrete that we use, it is concrete, but we're using as much recycled, upcycled materials as possible, and I'll speak to one of those experiments in a second. And some of the measurements that we've made along the way have shown that the panels can support up to 150 more species than a traditional seawall supports, that we get 3 times more biodiversity on a rock pool panel than on a flat panel, on a flat surface. And really importantly, with the climate stress that we see in the ocean, Inside some of the microhabitats, inside the rock pools, we see temperatures up to 18 degrees cooler. And I translated that into Fahrenheit to make sure that it made sense for people in the room. And I'm sorry that the slides are doing something strange. Okay. But I mentioned before, there's a whole range of other benefits that we really want to assess in relation to this project. Water quality is one of them. What are the benefits to fisheries? We have a lot of recreational fishing in Sydney, so we know that we're seeing more fisher people around our sites going out and fishing there. We want to know if that's because they're seeing more fish. Those fish are being supported by the living seawall panels, and try and quantify that. We've partnered with a kayaking group in Sydney to do tours of the living seawall panels and the sites we have there, and we want to understand what kind of impact that's having on the people who are visiting. Are they, enjoying the recreational aspect of an eco tour around living seawall sites? We want to understand other benefits in terms of the jobs that are coming from our work. The fabrication of panels, we're starting to expand in that area. The installation of panels, we're working with a lot of different engineering firms. And then education. We work in universities, so it's really important for us to kind of quantify our contributions to the next generation of scientists. And so we do, through the Living Seawalls Project, have a very extensive outreach and advocacy program. One of the wonderful benefits of working with an industrial designer has been that the panels are fairly beautiful. That's what we get told. And so museums have been really keen to feature them. And we've also done several art exhibits in Sydney, in Venice, in Sweden. And part of that is great for communicating the impacts that coastal development are having, but also communicating what people are doing to try and mitigate some of those impacts. And we also engage just more generally with local schools, and one of the wonderful stories that we've had just recently is a local school in Sydney raised funds to buy panels and install panels to create their own living seawall, and they're now using the monitoring protocols that we developed to go out and sample them and giving us that data and that information back, which is super exciting. I'm just going to reflect back on the first site that we installed at in Sydney Harbour, and I think it's probably one of the relevant ones for Boston as well. So I mentioned earlier on we started with just one site, and we had this fantastic champion in one of our municipalities, North Sydney Council. They worked very hard. Even 20 years ago, they were installing the flower pots from the DIY shops. They worked very hard with us to make the permitting process easy, to find ways that we could incorporate our living seawalls panels into seawalls where they were either building something new or where they were going to be doing some engineering works already. And from that support with North Sydney Council and their engagement with the other municipalities around Sydney Harbour, we now have 17 sites in Sydney, and that's supported by 7 different municipalities, and that's taken to a total of 879 panels. So it's really amazing and really exciting, and the talk between municipalities, now there's a bit of a competition, is that at some point we'll start linking up all of the different sites to have something a little bit more continuous. Cool. So that was a really great partnership, and I think the work with North Sydney Council really opened up a lot of doors in terms of how do we permit this new permanent installation of living seawall panels, and even the understanding of what they could mean for councils was an important step. Another really important step for us was working with a multinational developer, Lendlease, at a big urban renewal site in Sydney Harbour called Barangaroo. And I started working with Lendlease in around 2014, talking about ideas for what they could construct underwater. The developers had big plans to have a park above and below the waterline, and those plans included a focus on native trees above the waterline and as many native species as they could support below the waterline as well. So over a few different designs and iterations, we ended up designing specific panels that could be installed at Barangaroo with Lendlease. And this is the cove where they ended up being installed, and it was quite an interesting case study because we weren't installing onto a seawall. We had to work with engineers to design a specific truss system that could still support the panels and the geometries that we wanted to place at Barangaroo. But because of that emphasis on native species, we played around with the design a little bit to try and make sure that we would encourage native kelp, in particular native seaweed, to recruit to the panels there. One of the ways that we did that was by manipulating the materials in the concrete. And we hadn't done that before, and the results are still quite new, but we, with Lend-Lease, were keen to promote more sustainability at the site. So rather than having panels that were fully made of concrete, we incorporated recycled oyster shells that we collected from the Melbourne fish markets. And Alex spent a lot of time crushing them all to try and incorporate them into the concrete. So reducing that concrete footprint, but also being able to recycle some materials that would have otherwise been discarded. And overall, we were interested in oysters in particular because our local rock oyster, the Sydney rock oyster, encourages recruitment of other rock oysters. And we wanted to have native rock oysters growing on our panels, both for the native species dominance, but also because they could help improve the water quality in the area as well. The other thing we worked with Lend-Lease at this site was on planting an underwater garden. So I mentioned they were planting a lot of trees in the park above the waterline, and so they talked to me about how could we possibly do this underwater. This is our beautiful brown kelp from Sydney Harbour called Ecolonia radiata. It's fairly endangered in inner parts of the harbour because the water quality is bad. We get a lot of turfing seaweeds on our reefs in the inner part of the harbour. So we didn't want to go out and collect kelp from the inner part of the harbour and damage natural populations that were growing on reefs. We worked with the engineering company who were doing the construction at Barangaroo, and they were pulling out pylons for maintenance, and they were killing a lot of seaweeds in the process. So we timed it, and they told us when they were going to pull out the next lot of pylons. We went and we harvested all of the seaweed from those pylons. It was quite complicated because we had to get about 200 different seaweed individuals. But we harvested them from pilings nearby, and then we transported them across the harbour in a little research vessel to plant at Barangaroo and created the underwater garden in that way. Some of the ecologists out there might be saying, but it's not like a plant, it doesn't have roots, it's never going to reattach to the panels, and that's a great point. But what happened was we got seaweed babies growing on the panels afterwards, and that was more of the point of planting the garden, to try and stimulate some growth from those kelp in the future. Cool. So we're kind of getting to that point where I start talking more about the scale-up of the Living Seawalls project. So when we had collected quite a lot of our data and our results, we were nominated for the Earthshot Prize, which was a prize recognizing a lot of different efforts to build climate resilience and contribute to better climate outcomes into the future. And that nomination, even though we didn't win, we were finalists and we didn't win, has just opened the door to more advocacy for this sort of approach, more understanding of what the issues are and how they could be addressed through, things like these partnerships between different disciplines and this innovation in how we build into the oceans. And so now we have around 23 installations. Those are spanning about 4 different continents as well. And we've joked about trying to have an installation on every continent, but I don't think we really want to go to Antarctica. So that spread, it's important, it's great to have it. We're very conscious that we're mostly retrofitting to structures, and that there are other structures out there that are going to go into the ocean and could probably be designed better from the outset. We now have more than 2,500 panels in the water, and that's growing all the time, particularly through some of our partners who are scaling up in ports around the world, and I'll talk a little bit more about them in a minute. And that public-private partnership that we've kind of relied on for getting acceptance, getting permitting in Sydney has really helped us to scale the project immensely. So working with Lend-Lease, DP World, Volvo Cars was one of our early supporters, but also not just the municipalities that supported some of those early installations that I mentioned. The Barangaroo installation has been designed by Lend-Lease. It's now maintained by Infrastructure New South Wales, who's a state government agency, and they are supporting the monitoring program at the site, which is for 5 years to understand all of the benefits that have been created. So that's been really important for us. And people do associate the Living Seawalls project with seawalls, very understandably, and certainly that's the space that we've initially started to experiment and test really extensively. But we realized that these geometries, they support marine life. They can provide many other kinds of benefits, and they can be incorporated into many different kinds of structures. So this is one of our, or a couple of our new designs, the living boulders. Those are now installed at one site in Sydney Harbour, so very early days for that, very early testing. But we specifically focused on rock pool geometries there because we were installing intertidally, and that was one of the features that was missing from a lot of our revetment walls in Sydney. The piling habitat modules are another design where we've incorporated rock pools into the panels that we're installing, and these are quite simply wrapped and locked with clamps into place. So if there's any engineers here, you're probably looking at some of these still going, you're drilling into walls, you're clamping things onto structures, and again, when we're retrofitting, that's the options that we have. But then working with, I mentioned before, some of our industrial partners has allowed us to start incorporating these geometries directly into materials as they're being cast. So DP World has been a really big supporter of Living Seawalls through the Earthshot Prize. And our first project with them has been in Puerto Callao, which is in Peru. They approached us because they were doing a very extensive jetty redevelopment. And the engineers there, they looked at our panels and they said, we don't want to drill anything in, but we are casting pile casings. If you get us the molds with the kinds of geometries that you want installed, we'll be able to cast them directly into our pile casings, and we'll put them on the pilings when we're installing the jetty. So this was 2 years ago now that we started this conversation. The pile casings went in about 6 months ago, so we're getting some monitoring results back from that early days, but we're seeing a lot more seaweeds recruiting to the geometries that we've installed, which is very promising because it was one of the groups that they wanted to target with this installation. And there's many, many more research questions, and I've got this picture here as a bit of a final one. I just leave some time for questions if people have them as well. But Boston is obviously an early adopter as well to the Living Seawalls project, and it's been really exciting to visit here back with the Earthshot Prize and start talking about how we could work together and how we could install Living Seawalls here to the actual installation, and now 6 months down the track, hearing from the students who are monitoring these sites what wonderful things are starting to recruit and what great benefits we're already seeing. And there's a lot more research questions around this that the Stone Living Lab is currently considering, so stay tuned. That's information for the next conference, perhaps. But I also wanted to give a shout out because the Boston crew will be presenting in a panel presentation. That's Kirk, Jarrett, Joe, Melba, and Daniel, so that's tomorrow. So I don't want to steal their thunder by saying too much about Boston, but that's the panel discussion that you all need to join if you want to hear about what's happening over here. And I'll just finish there. There's been so many people supporting this project, it's actually hard to squeeze all of those things onto one page, but our website does really good justice to acknowledging all of our supporters, and big thank you to everyone here for listening, for letting me tell you about the story of Living Seawalls project, and happy to take any questions.
Thank you. Wonderful talk. Have invasive species been an issue in any of the designs or locations? And I imagine that could be an issue with some of the compliance and permitting. How have you addressed that?
Yeah, so the collaboration with Lend-Lease, when they first approached, it was to create a baseline monitoring program for what was at the site in Barangaroo, and the big thing that they were worried about was invasive species there. So after the monitoring that we had done there, we talked to them about, when you are developing this site, what could you do to reduce invasion? One of the approaches was the geometries from the living seawalls panels. We knew already that some of them were supporting more native species than others, and so we suggested those particular designs to be applied at Barangaroo. We also incorporated the natural materials because we knew that native species would prefer to recruit to those, and we thought that would give native species a helping hand. The third aspect was planting the native kelp forest, occupying space on the panels so that other invasive species couldn't recruit. And then the fourth, we actually angled the panels at Barangaroo so that they would capture more sunlight. Because we know as well in Sydney Harbour, 70% of our invasive species are invertebrates, and they don't do so well if they're in shaded conditions underneath the jetty. So we angled for more sunlight. We did have other great ideas about creating transparent boardwalks above the panels so that more sunlight could come through and more seaweeds would be supported. Following some examples actually from North America, where in Seattle they've created a whole transparent boardwalk for the salmon migration. But the funding didn't actually allow for that in the end, so the angled panels was sort of our solution. And what we saw was from the baseline monitoring at that site, where it was about 30-40% invasive species, we now have about 0.5 to 1% invasive species on the panels. Yeah. So lots of different things, but it was all under that umbrella of trying to minimize invasive species recruitment. And it's been the same with all of the ports that I've worked with. There's always that concern that there's a lot of invasive species around. We're not just providing more space for them to recruit with, so very conscious of that. There's one design that we're not recommending for port areas because we've seen a particular invasive sea squirt likes to live on it. So we're learning, and we make sure we share those learnings with people to tailor things for their particular aims and site constraints. Thanks, Mark.
Hi, welcome, by the way. Just curious, all the work that you shared was beautiful. I'm a designer at heart, and so it's really important for me to see how, a lot of the monitoring and, the detail to how the construction of these components have become a part of this living system overall. And you showcase sort of the global reach of this project, which is pretty inspirational. My question, I guess, is more on sort of your vision for scaling the initiative here in the Eastern US context. We all are thriving in this blue bubble as we speak, and I wonder how you feel from a perspective of not only funding research, ongoing monitoring, and deploying these technologies across the eastern US coast, where do you see opportunity in the next couple years to longer term?
Yeah, I think this partnership with Stone Living Lab has been instrumental in trying to realize how the Living Seawalls project could be implemented and used in North America. And I don't want to steal thunder from the panel later, but the understanding that was created through the installation here, understanding permitting processes, understanding what it takes to, it's not really an experiment anymore, it's an experiment that's going to be there forever. What does it take to overcome some of the barriers associated with that, which we had a lot of learnings from Australia, from Sydney, but it's different in every location depending on interactions between municipal, state, and federal government. But I see that amazing connection here between different levels of government. I see that through the Stone Living Lab, and I see that connection to partners who are ready to sort of implement this at scale if we can tell them how to do it. So there's just an amazing amount of potential, no shortage of beautiful waterline to work with, and looking at some of the marine life that's around here, the beautiful things that we can support. I realized, like in Sydney, our real focus was biodiversity. There was a big piece around water quality and invasive species, but in Boston, what can we do to mitigate flooding, to mitigate erosion? There's ways that we can design the geometries to still be beautiful, to still have that biodiversity benefit, but also, provide a whole range of other benefits, environmental, socio-cultural, economic, the sky's the limit. Hopefully now that I'm here in North America, there's a base for Living Seawalls to grow and expand. We've started manufacturing partnerships now in a couple of places, and we've started a model with DP World where we send molds and they cast the molds for us. So we're experimenting with different styles of partnerships to see how do we continue scaling and learning from each of those experiences. Yeah.
Hello, I'm Dakota. I had a question. You had mentioned earlier that the life scale estimated by that construction company earlier on was 20 years. And then with the reef growing on it, it would last longer. What type of research has been done for like biogenic, like cement and gluing stuff from like mussels and barnacles on how that affects the long-term longevity of the living wall?
That's a really great question, and it's a research question that's ongoing at the moment. There's a CRC, a cooperative research center in Australia called SmartCrete, and they've been really interested in understanding how growth on concrete, particularly submerged concrete, changes the corrosion properties of the concrete and affects the longevity. So they've got tanks set up, they're simulating changes in tide, simulating changes in weather conditions, but I just don't have any of those results yet to talk about. But certainly something that we're really interested in testing longer term. It's really hard once these panels are out and they've got 5 years of growth on them. You don't want to remove them and start testing, so we have to do it all in terms of simulation to try and answer some of the questions that we're interested in. Yeah.
Hi. Thank you very much. That was really interesting. I'm actually from the Technion in Haifa in Israel, and we've done some of this 3D printing for artificial reefs in the Red Sea. So one of my colleagues from my faculty, I'm at the Faculty of Architecture, and we have architecture and town planning, and we have an industrial design group that's working on that. So thank you very much. My question is, regarding what you said about 20 years, more or less, is the kind of the longevity of these panels. Mm-hmm. And I was thinking if you're taking into consideration changing conditions in terms of what can settle on the tiles because temperatures are changing. I mean, it kind of connects to the invasive species idea, but more with regard to water levels and exposures and things like that.
That's another great question, and I believe that is one of the considerations in the corrosion testing that's underway, kind of looking at some of the future scenarios for where these panels might be installed. I should clarify that the 20 years is just based on the panels with no growth and based on the fairly sheltered conditions that we've installed them at in Sydney Harbour so far. But yeah, more research questions about kind of future scenarios that might impact on both what grows on the panels, but also their performance on a seawall, definitely something that we're interested in. One of the things I should have mentioned is when we do install the panels, we don't want to go in and scrape anything that's living on the seawalls. That would be kind of detrimental to what our big goals are around biodiversity. So we actually intentionally set the panels about 10 centimeters off a seawall so that we have the life behind the seawall, we have life growing on both sides of the seawall as well, and we're basically kind of tripling up the biodiversity that then is growing there. And that growth behind the panel and the fusion between what's on the wall and what's on the back of the panel also, adds that extra support over time that, I would expect increases the structural integrity if we can find a way to measure that.
Hi. I have a question about quantifying the ecological benefit. So as you're monitoring and you're seeing the benefit of each of these panels, is it kind of a one-to-one relationship? One panel equals X ecological benefit, or is there kind of a cumulative exponential benefit, both in the number of panels and maybe over time as well?
That's a really interesting question as well. So one of the statistics that I mentioned earlier, that the panels support 3 times more diversity than flat panels, that's our specific rock pool panel. So our rock pool design and our crevice and ledge designs support the most biodiversity. But what we found in Sydney Harbour is that you actually need a range of all the designs because each one supports some unique species. So you get great biodiversity outcomes from some of the designs, but the mosaic, the combination of all of the different designs is what kind of helps helps support species that might not otherwise occur on a seawall. One of the things I kind of touched on it just now is we've only quantified the diversity on the front of the panels simply because we can't measure what's on the back. But we see it. We know that there's a huge amount of life and it's different from what's on the front. So there's always this kind of doubling effect on each panel having that growth in both places. And then your other point about do you need one panel or do you need a whole wall of panels? We're starting to experiment a little bit both with the configuration of designs and the number of panels that it takes to create different levels of benefit. Early days, but hopefully in the next year or so, some of those results will have been quantified and we can start talking about them and publish them as well. Because that's a question we get asked all the time. How many panels should I put on my seawall? Our standard installation in Sydney Harbour is 72 panels. That's 10-meter length. 2-meter height because our tidal range is 2 meters. Here in Boston, it's 10 meters, 3-meter height because the tidal range here is 3 meters. And then Barangaroo was an interesting one because it wasn't a seawall, and we were installing with the truss system between the pylons. That one actually has subtidal panels as well, and we're seeing completely different things grow because we've gone a little bit deeper with the panels that we've installed. And DP World, with some of their new installations in Dubai, are also extending some of the designs subtidally, so we can capture how do they work when we put them even deeper in the water, because we've mainly been intertidal with the seawall so far.
Hi, Katie. Katie, great work. Yeah. I was wondering whether, in your work in Australia, whether there's been any interest at all in looking at the wave attenuation potential of the geometries of these structures.
It's something that's coming up more and more, and definitely something that we're discussing in Boston with the Stone Living Lab. Sydney, we just hadn't done it so far because it wasn't a big issue for the sites that we were installing at in the beginning. But as more people have approached us and talked about putting things like our living boulders or even our panels on coastal defense structures, we've started thinking about how do we measure how they're working already, and then how do we think about redesigning them so that they can actually address that issue more specifically, whilst also still trying to preserve some of the other benefits from it. So something that we're thinking about, not something that we've been designing for as yet.
Hello again. The living ports, was it in Sao Paulo or I forget exactly where?
Port of Callao in Peru.
Port of Callao. Okay, I'll write that down later. But so far, in I believe 6 months since it was fully installed,
Yep.
what have you been seeing in its development? And do you think other large-scale, like mega projects incorporating these designs are feasible?
Yeah. I mean, the great thing working with DP World, they have this network of global ports. So starting with Peru, it's been a really great example to assess how the geometries work in that particular climatic condition. So quite different again from Sydney, but two of the groups that they were really interested in particularly supporting were seaweeds and mussels. They had 2 native species that they wanted to see grow. And so we looked back at the results what we had from Sydney, where the designs were supporting more seaweed growth and more mussel growth, and those were the ones that we picked to install in Peru and test there. And we're at the moment comparing modified pylons, which have all of our modules incorporated, and unmodified. And we've seen that increase in seaweeds and mussels on the pylons that have our geometries installed into them. One of the concerns that DP World had was, what if a boat knocks against these? Because on the panels, the shapes protrude, but DP World set them into the pile so that that wouldn't be an issue. And that happened through the molding process. So the shapes don't protrude from the piles, they're actually inset shapes. And again, you know, we designed that with them to make sure that it accounted for some of their constraints and their needs. So next is, it's happening in Dubai right now. They're installing a few thousand living seawall panels. So it'll be quite good when we can see how that scale of installation, that'll be the biggest one we've ever done, how that does translate to benefits.
Hi, thank you so much for the talk. That was amazing. I love the interdisciplinary nature of the work. And coming from Baltimore Harbor, I'm curious about what you've learned from these, or what early lessons you're learning from engagements with fisher people or people working in like an industrialized space, but that has maintained a culture of watermen and fishing and etc.?
I guess some of the learnings, one, it takes a village. I guess, is that a good way to talk about it? Because we've needed a lot of different people involved to actually make things happen. And I mentioned that connection between different levels of government being one of the key things, but community support has been amazing. From crowdsourcing to install panels themselves, the kayaking group who now do the tours, they crowdsourced to install a boulder site for us, the school that did the same thing. We haven't worked so much with recreational fishers yet, but there's an app in Sydney called Ozfish where they're recording different fish captures. So we're looking at how the data from that app could be used to inform, are there different fish visiting our sites, and how are our panels actually affecting recreational fish catches. So lots of areas to kind of explore there. But I guess one of the early things, the reason we started with only 2 sites was nobody knew what this was and what it really meant, and there were different jurisdictions where we were installing different responsibilities. And it being a permanent installation, everyone was worried about maintenance long-term, health and safety risks long-term. So there were a lot of discussions initially to try and work out what that meant, and to smooth the process in future for the permitting pathway. But that, again, has taken all of government coordinating to support it, and now it's relatively easy for us. A couple of years for the first permit, now it's like a couple of weeks to get a permit and to get installations happening, so it's been really great. One more question.
Hi there, thank you very much for your presentation. I'm curious if you're doing any work that looks at barrier beaches where you've got velocity. Right now I'm sort of sensing that these structures are being used in areas where you've got a tidal exchange but pretty quieted waters. In outer Boston Harbor, we have Nantasket Beach at 7 miles long, and we're looking to sort of manage the velocity of ocean surf across that community, and also on the wetland side. And I wonder if there are any ways to sort of innovate, if you're creating ways to innovate your structure to absorb seawater and deal with any of those kind of issues.
That's another great question, and maybe there'll be some opportunities in the next few years with the Stone Living Lab to work on questions like that. I have had early chats with Kirk Bosba, and he has some really great ideas, I think, for changing the geometries to be more about wave mitigation, to be more in support of erosion mitigation as well. So I think stay tuned for that. It's not something we tested before. We definitely have mainly done sheltered conditions so far, harbor conditions. Better step off now, but thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Katie. That was incredible and great range of questions too. Please feel free to be getting coffee and snacks, and if snacks are still out there, I think we're setting up lunch soon, but lunch is going to be at noon, so we have our next keynote speaker coming up right now, but first I wanted to do a little bit of housekeeping and some additional thank yous also. So wanted to make sure to say a big thank you, speaking of coffee, snacks, and lunch, to the UMass Boston event services and catering teams, which have just been absolutely incredible, as well as the AV team, so thank you. I wanted to say another thank you to the photographer who I see sneaking up behind me here, Dominique, who's doing incredible work. Love working with Dominique. Dominique, thank you very much. And then I want to say a thank you to our partners at Lusterity, who we've partnered with to bring you these climate stripes that you're seeing here at the bottom of the stage. And I'm going to read a little sort of overview of what these are about. So the Climate Stripes project was created by Professor Ed Hawkins, a climate scientist at University of Reading in the UK. The global warming stripes are a simple visual representation of the long-term rise in global temperatures due to human-caused climate change. Each stripe represents the average global temperature for a single year relative to the average temperature over the period as a whole, from 1850 to 2023. Shades of blue indicate cooler than average years, while red shows years that were hotter than average. So thank you, Lustardi, for bringing those with us today. And then to the side of the stage here as well, you're going to see some flags that are the coastal resilience principles that Bob Chen and other members of the lab developed, Rebecca Shore as well, and many other folks in the early days of the Stone Living Lab. So please check those out as well. They're really central to all the work we do. So now I would like to introduce our next keynote speaker and my friend, Dr. Atyia Martin. Dr. Atyia Martin is the CEO and founder of All Aces, Inc., an alternative to traditional diversity, equity, and inclusion consulting and professional development. Their online learning community, intentionallyact.com, supports their mission to activate consciousness, catalyze critical thinking, and transform capabilities that advance racial equity and build resilience. Dr. Martin is also a distinguished senior fellow at Northeastern University's Global Resilience Institute. She has 20 years of experience in public service and mission-driven organizations. As a certified emergency manager, her previous professional roles include Chief Resilience Officer for the City of Boston, where I first met her and we were able to work together, Director of the Office of Public Health Preparedness at the Boston Public Health Commission, and adjunct faculty in the Master of Homeland Security and Public Policy programs at Northeastern University. Dr. Martin has also held positions at the Boston Police Department's Boston Regional Intelligence Center, City of Boston's Mayor's Office of Emergency Management, the Federal Bureau of Investigations, the Air Force as an active duty assigned to the National Security Agency, and the Initiative for a Competitive Intercity. Dr. Martin and her husband were born and raised in Boston, where they currently live. They co-founded Next Leadership Development Corporation, a nonprofit focused on building resilience in Black households and communities. They have 5 children, 2 still at home. Dr. Martin, please join us.
All right, Joe, I got to pull this way down here. Okay, here we go. Happy Wednesday, everyone. It is Wednesday, right? Okay, I'm just checking. I get the days wrong sometime. It is such a pleasure to be here with you all. Thank you, Joe, for the wonderful introduction. It's always a pleasure to be in space with you, and thank you for trusting me to be a part of this wonderful conference. So I'm going to talk about 4 questions, and I'm going to need your help. So I'm asking for permission, kind of, sort of, volunteering you in advance that I will be bringing you into the conversation, because these are big questions, and we have a lot of those answers among us through collective intelligence. So we are going to explore these 4 questions. Number 1, what do we do? What can we do when the government systems that we depend on fail us? That's a big one, and I'm gonna set the stage for you, and then we're gonna jump in together, I promise. The second one is, how do we create an alternative to sustain progress and continue our work? So that's the second one. The third one is, what are considerations for doing work in communities with communities? And the fourth one is, where are there opportunities for us to incorporate resilience and justice within our nature-based solutions work? That's 4. So we're going to do all of that before lunch. So let's see how far we get, y'all. Let's see how far we get. So first and foremost, one of the most important things to know about me is that was mentioned towards the end of the introduction, which is that my husband and I were born and raised in Boston. We have 5 children, and there are 2 still at home, 5 grandbabies. Life is real, life is full, and that's how I learned a lot around resilience, emergency management, and all the stuff. And one of the first question that we're jumping into about government, what happens when government fails us? What do we do? is really centered on the fact that we oftentimes think of government as something separate and apart from us. That is, that it is those people, those organizations' work to do, and it is our job to hold them accountable, right? That's oftentimes how we think about our relationship with government. And when government doesn't do the things that we expect from government, uphold the commitments, sometimes the Constitution, what do we do? And in that reality sits something that is really challenging, which is that although the government is an institution, federal government specifically, that ultimately it is an institution that we are a part of. So when government falls apart, it means something has fallen apart with us as people, as organizations supporting, working in communities, as organizations committed to climate action and the broader society. And as we are navigating this huge question, there's some context that I want to set for us. One is about resilience principles. Now, most of you in this room sounds like are engineers, planners, scientists. What am I missing? Raise some hands and tell me who's in the room. What you got? Teachers, right? Round of applause for our teachers. Who else is in the room? Funding specialists. Is that for an organization to get money, or are you giving out money? Oh, okay. Looking for money. So y'all hear that for the folks who have the money, our philanthropy people in the room. We have some folks in the room looking for money. Who else do we have in the room? Local advocates? Local advocates, right? So give our local advocates a round of applause. Thank you. You're going to play an important role in this conversation, so I'll be coming looking over at you sometimes. Who else do we have in the space? Say that one more time. MetOcean data providers. Did I get that right? Okay. Hey, every now and again I get some stuff right. Thank you for that. Anyone else who wasn't represented? Mass Oyster Project, nonprofit. Thank you for your service. Thank you for all that you do. We have another one who needs some money for those folks in the room who have the money, right? So as we think about all of our different roles in this space, we're in a very difficult time, right? And anybody here feeling, so we're going to use fake emojis. We're going to use old school analog emojis, our thumbs, right? So thumbs up, thumbs to the side, thumbs down. Thumbs up if you're feeling a bit hopeless and helpless. To the side if you're kind of, sort of. Down if you're like, I feel really energized, like I can move mountains. We got some crosses, some thumbs up, some thumbs down. We got some folks who feel like they can move some mountains right now. Okay, thank you for allowing me to kind of pay attention. Got some thumbs down. Lots of maybes kind of in the middle there, right? So this has been a test of our individual and collective resilience. And so let's dig a little bit deeper into this part. So principles of resilience, given the context of the folks who are in the room. How many people are familiar with the 4 principles of resilience? Did I get too nerdy already? Out the gate, sorry. 4 principles, okay. So you've heard these before, you just haven't heard anyone necessarily call them the 4 principles of resilience. I promise you've heard this before. So one, and this is from a synthesis of all different fields of resilience, from engineering to psychological resilience and everything in between, all the different ways that we think about resilience. So number 1 is robustness. What are the pre-existing conditions and the capabilities, so the conditions and the capabilities that allow us to withstand any given disruption, stress, situation, right? So robustness is about what is our status before something happens, and that dictates how we're able to navigate through what the impacts of a particular situation are. So that's one piece, so robustness. The second one is redundancy, right? So again, this should be familiar, y'all. Redundancy. So making sure that we have multiple components, alternative paths, flexibility that allows for us to keep the most important things moving forward even when there are disruptions. Anything foreign or unfamiliar so far? We're all on the same page? Okay. Third, rapidity. Now, oftentimes people get this one confused. Rapidity isn't just about bouncing back as quickly as possible. Rapidity includes our ability to bounce forward as quickly as possible. And in order to do that well, we have had to consider robustness. What are the pre-existing situations and circumstances that communities were dealing with ahead of time? And figure out how we are going to be intentional about working that into what we're doing. And then the last one is resourcefulness. Resourcefulness really is about our ability to collaborate with each other, our ability to work together, to maximize all of our collective energy, effort, brilliance, resources in order to work through the challenges that are in front of us. Before something happens, when things happen, and as we're in the process of recovery. Was that pretty familiar to folks? You've heard that stuff before, right? So when we think about those 4 R's, the opportunities we have around how we understand the current situation that communities are dealing with, how we understand the things that we need to have in place as alternatives for when systems fail. And a lot of times what we don't realize is that many communities have developed their own informal and formal systems and networks that help them to fill the gaps that get left in their communities, including as it relates to climate resilience and what it means to take meaningful climate action. So as we are exploring this first question of what can we do, I'm curious what folks are already doing, given the reality that we're sitting within with this current administration and political context. And you're gonna just shout them out like before. I started easy and then we got hard real fast, y'all, just like that. Calling our reps. So we as individuals, we have what's called agency. We have power to call our reps. What else can we do?
Attend protests.
Attend protests.
Prioritizing community events, like going to events that are part of my community and make me feel good and just like get to spend time with people I like, you know.
Yes, connecting with our communities so that we can engage in meaningful action, but also to serve our human need for connection. What else?
Sharing information.
Sharing information? What do you mean sharing information? What kind of information?
In times where lots of different stories are getting told to different audiences, making sure that information is both shared across so that we can get a clearer picture of what's happening, but also asking questions to make sure we actually understand what's happening.
So, did everyone hear that? Sharing information to make sure that everyone has access to a common narrative that helps to filter out some of the mis and disinformation. Is that fair? Is that fair a summary? And then I saw another hand over here. My apologies. Yes, ma'am.
Leaning into our advocacy and public education personas a little more.
Leaning into our personal advocacy personas a little bit more. And tell me more what you mean by that.
So reconnecting with community groups that we historically worked with, because now more than ever is when they could use some capacity bringing resources where there might be some scarcity?
Okay, you said a lot there, and that's it. Now you're getting us into, we're transitioning from what can I do as an individual to what can we do within our organizations. And what was said is reconnecting with community organizations that we've developed relationships with to check on them because this is a difficult time for many communities. And how can we collaborate with them? The second one is how can we support capacity building? How can we help bring resources to support and partner with communities in this moment? So thank you very much for that. Yes, sir. Support high-quality media outlets. Thank you so much for that, right? We want to support folks who are giving us the facts, unfiltered, unadulterated. Yes, you want to hear, and then we're going to come here. Use the power of the wallet to not support organizations affiliated with those who are causing harm. Fair synthesis? I'm going to come here, then I'm going to come up here. Oh. Sorry, say that one more time. Teaching our kids that science rocks. I'm just going to let that hang for a moment. And supporting our schools. Thank you for that. And then I'm going to come up here.
Spreading joy.
Spreading joy. How are we spreading joy?
Sharing success stories, sharing wins, loving people that we have loved, being there for them. Don't forget about joy. We need it to be able to build that robustness.
Can we all give a round of applause for that? And my apologies for folks who are on this end of the room. You may not have fully heard that. So what was said is spreading joy, making sure that we are coming from a place of love and interacting with other folks, that we're sharing stories, that we're sharing good things with other folks. Is that fair synthesis? Not as powerful as what she said, y'all, sorry. But that is what was said. So that's what you were clapping for. Yes, ma'am. And then I'm going to take a sweep around this way.
Planting trees.
Planting trees.
So doing physical things that the community can see and on a local level and getting people physically engaged is something that's beneficial.
Planting trees, getting people physically engaged in an activity that helps to get the body moving, but also is having a powerful impact. And then I'm sweeping this way here.
Listening and then learning, being willing to challenge what you hear, and being ready to compromise, knowing there isn't a winner-gets-it-all solution.
So listening and learning, so listening to learn. Not being afraid of challenges, and being able to compromise, knowing that there isn't always one clear solution or answer. And then I'm sweeping this way. I thought I saw some hands. And yes, yes, ma'am.
Two pieces of this. One is ask difficult questions and have hard conversations. And the other part of that is clarify the language you're using. Make sure you're using words and language aligning on what that means.
Yes, so ask the hard questions. Don't be afraid to ask the hard questions. We are in different spaces, and when we're in those spaces, we're there for a reason. And if something comes to mind, we have to figure out a way to express it in those rooms because, contrary to popular belief, oftentimes no one else is going to do it. So you got to be the one to do it. Don't assume that somebody else is going to say the hard thing or ask the hard question. The second part of that was also about clarifying language, being clear about what we mean with the words we say. Use plain language. We have a lot of folks who have a higher level of technical and scientific knowledge who are communicating with folks. We also have a lot of language that gets thrown around in kind of racial and social justice circles that sometimes are not easy to connect to for people. So what's the plain language way of communicating and engaging with folks around these issues? Excellent, thank you. Any other thoughts as we come around this way? Two more. Talk to your neighbors. What should you talk to your neighbors about? Talk to your neighbors, build relationships with your neighbors, know who they are, and start to create space where they know that they are welcomed and that we can interact with one another and find some common ground as well as solutions and approaches. And then I saw one more hand back here. Yes, ma'am. Teach civics. Okay. She said a lot with 2 words. Understanding the historic and social context in which we are in is critical. We don't learn it in school. We never learn that full historical context that respects the complexity of how we got to where we are today. Why does today look the way it does? And in absence of that context, we oftentimes make the same mistakes over and over again, or we fail to see the wins we had in the past and how they are relevant to today and how we can apply those situations to what we're dealing with today. We end up reinventing the wheel a lot and failing longer instead of failing faster by iterating on what we already understand and know and have experienced, as well as understanding that robustness. Why do communities look the way they do? For every issue, there is a historic and social context and series of stories that explains it. I have yet to look up an issue, pick an issue. I have yet to look up an issue and did not find an overwhelming avalanche of stories and context for why that issue looks the way it does today, whether it's education, whether it's wealth, whether it's how we do community engagement, whether it's people's homes and who are homeowners and who aren't. Why is that? Why do people live in certain parts of a city or community? There's a whole series of stories that explains it. What else? Okay, so we're gonna transition. So you all just got some inspiration from your fellow attendees around where are there possibilities when systems fail us. I'm gonna present a couple of more, and then we're gonna transition to however many more questions we can get through, because it's heavy, right? Those questions are heavy. So one of the things I wanted to share and remind us of is we're thinking about this question of what do we do when government systems fail is creating an alternative. There are times where while we're holding people accountable and institutions accountable, we also have to be doing stuff that actually helps move the needle forward. Sometimes it's through, over, under, and I'll give a concrete example. We meaning Next Leadership Development, my nonprofit, we are doing work across the country post-disaster in Black communities around the country. And a lot of times we're working with community-based organizations who've never been involved in disaster response or recovery, but the community members come to them because they already have a relationship in those communities. And so they go to them looking for help and support, and the community organizations are then forced to figure out how to navigate a complicated web of resources and infrastructure that gets stood up that has its own language that they're trying to plug into to get resources in their communities. In Mississippi, right now, just 2 nights ago, we had our call with our colleagues in Mississippi across the state, preparing for how we coordinate resources post the at least 14 tornadoes that hit Mississippi between April 2nd and April 6th. Some of you may not have been aware of that because it's not being widely talked about. In March, they had 12 tornadoes that touched down in Mississippi. So we're working with them on, given the fact that the state, and I will be vague about some of this to protect people, that given that the state was not providing the information necessary to do meaningful coordination and support to communities, what would we do? Were we going to just be mad at them and keep asking in meetings, or were we going to do something that would help us get those answers? So what we did is we took the 22 counties that were impacted, divided them up among the group to call, said we're going to call each emergency manager and get the information we need. And we're going to create a data sheet that's going to help us track what the impacts are, how many homes were damaged, major versus minor damage, how many homes were insured versus uninsured, how many folks were renters versus not renters. So this kind of data then allows us to target our limited resources in the areas that need the support the most. And we went through that process, and we actually got the information we need, and now we're coordinating on getting the resources to communities in partnership with a number of those emergency managers. So all of that to say, we created an alternative. We said, okay, there's a roadblock here through the traditional way we go about doing things. What can we do as an alternative to get what we need in order to really help people, to get this work done? So I use that as a concrete example that's fresh in my mind. I have lots of them from Boston and around the country, but that's the one that's freshest on my mind given the need. Speaking of an alternative, how do we create alternatives in the work that we're doing? What are some of the things, the barriers that you all are coming up against, and what are some of the strategies you're using to navigate those barriers? All right, so let that sit with you for a moment. How are you all creating alternatives in the work that you're doing? Or where have you seen alternatives that maybe are inspiring to you? Yes, ma'am. In places where they're not having important conversation, those hard, talking through those hard questions and hard issues, creating the space for folks to come together to do that, to figure out how they can work together on things. What else? Yes, ma'am. I'm going to sweep across the room this way. Thank you, and that's not small scale, that's real scale, right? So what we're talking about is counter narratives, making sure that folks are getting exposed to a real narrative about them being welcomed, about their possibilities, who they are, and that this is a space where they are welcomed and can feel safe and brave. Yes, ma'am.
Supporting international students, especially in spaces like where we find ourselves, doing work on research, science, and technology, things that we critically need to move the needle on a lot of advocacy subjects, one, and then I guess the second part of this is supporting grassroots organizations where their work is critical in ways that is truly, I guess, it's never been as critical as it is today. So making sure that they feel supported and have the resources to keep doing the work that they need to do.
So we want to rally around organizations, grassroots organizations, and we want to make sure that we're engaging in advocacy. Thank you so much for that. I'm sweeping this way. Anyone else Oh, we have one way in the back there. Raise your hand one more time. Way, way in the back. Thank you.
Creating curriculum in order to teach science in social context in ways that make it relevant to students and the communities that they live in.
Creating curriculum that is relevant, right? So folks, again, can make that connection between the past and the present. Thank you so much for that. And we have another hand up here, and then here. So we have two more, one right back there and one here.
Asking the questions of how I can help and realizing where I don't have the capacity, identifying resources in others that can, and thinking about what are the different ways that I can help and leverage my networks to help those that are struggling right now.
Thank you for that. How to leverage our power that we do have to help others. And then we had one here.
Kind of echoing a lot of what other people are saying, but just a reminder to not be too prescriptive when we are thinking globally and acting locally, and how these broad-scale choices and guidelines can kind of diminish the real scale and erase a lot of culturally or geographically specific approaches to resilience that already exist, like you said, not reinventing the wheel and recognizing that there are many wheels.
Thank you so much. Baltimore, right? Sorry, I don't remember your name. So let's sit there for a moment because it's such an important point. So thank you for raising that. This idea of not being too prescriptive, and let me just clarify, are you talking about in the context of the work that we're doing around leveraging nature-based solutions? Okay, so when we're doing our work to address climate change, particularly around nature-based solutions, that we're not being too prescriptive, that we're respecting the historic and cultural realities in communities that existed before we showed up, and that there's actually knowledge there. Oftentimes we talk about indigenous knowledge. I know that was spoken of today. I want to expand that to community context. They are the context experts. And anything that we do on a technical level requires good context. And if we're not coordinating with community folks who have been living in spaces before we showed up, then we are missing huge opportunities to have the biggest and best impact possible with our work. It's not it's not about saving people or doing things to and for people. It's about doing things with people. And when we take that approach, magic happens. We are able to get exposed to perspectives and ideas and approaches that we could not possibly have thought of on our own. So I'm a huge proponent of partnering with communities to do things with them, even when it feels like they have no idea what the thing is that you're working on is. You'd be surprised that when you find the plain language way of communicating it, how much people understand and care and can help connect it to some of that robustness. So thank you for that. What else we got?
Something that's key, based on what you just said about involving the community in the approaches that you're seeking to implement, is also supporting individuals in those communities to take ownership and actually involve them directly, not just, oh, I'm taking a survey, this is what you're thinking, and then I'm using that independent of you. No, you're going to be in the conversation, you're going to be in the implementation, and the community is going to be there throughout the entire thing. And I think that's really important.
You said a lot, too, okay? So what's really important about what you're saying is you're talking about just approaches. What are the best practices around governance? And I know governance, oftentimes people think government, but governance is about how we make decisions throughout an entire process, who has different opportunities to be a part of the decision-making process at different points of the process, and where's the intentionality with how that actually happens. So to your point, distributing a survey, it gets you information, but that's not necessarily partnering with communities. In fact, it's a baby step towards it. So how are we building those relationships and really partnering with communities through being clear with our processes that we are leveraging to get our work done in communities, to work on the different projects that we have. So we have 4 more minutes. Any last addition to this piece before we close out with our last one? Yes, ma'am. Yeah, I'll repeat. Oh, here she comes. She's running. Okay, thank you.
So hi, one of my things that maybe we haven't talked about is really working with transdisciplinary approaches and doing research that matters to people, not us bringing whatever we think that is important to them, but really listening them and all of the actions that we do to answer their needs and not our needs as researchers.
Okay, so she took it up a notch, y'all. She took it up a few notches. So how do we make sure that the research we're doing actually connects with the real world? And I know, I'm a nerd too, y'all. I'm a nerd, and I love to dig into the data and do analyses and charts and all types of fun stuff, fun to me anyways, fun stuff around issues. But the big question is, how does it help people? How does it connect to the real world challenges, and how does it also incorporate the strengths in communities? I know you didn't mention that, but I'm remixing a little bit. I'm adding that on there, a little salt and pepper on there. But how do we make sure that we're really partnering in ways that allows our research and our impact of our research to be more meaningful? And that's hard. And a lot of the things we talked about are hard. And they feel even harder because we are kind of used to doing things a certain way. But this approach is actually the way we probably should have been doing it all along. So it's going to take us some time to build the muscles to like really figure out what it looks like for us to embed these approaches, practices, and ideas around how do we connect the dots when government fails. How do we take meaningful action in partnership with communities? How do we create these alternative pathways? And how do we make sure that we're embedding it in nature-based solutions? So we actually answered, y'all, all 4 questions. So I want to give us a round of applause because we really did that. And I want to leave you with just a couple of things in my last minute. So number 1 is, during Black Lives Matter, I saw this protest sign. This was the 2020, and it sat with me. And I feel like it's so relevant to this moment we're in right now. And it said, if you've ever wondered what you would have done during slavery, during the Holocaust, or during the civil rights era, you're doing it right now. If you've ever wondered what you would do in those historical moments, you're doing it right now. And we are in a moment that is today, but today will become history. And what we do today will have a direct impact on tomorrow, but also what is the legacy that we want to be leaving behind? What kind of historical stories and context do we want people to be saying about us in this moment? So I want to say thank you so much for your time today. I'm sending so much love, hope, and intentional action to each and every one of you on your journey to do amazing work around climate resilience. Appreciate you.